All right, this is fabulous. We're almost at 150 attendees. Thank you so much for joining today. Quick introductions, and then we've got a packed agenda, so we're going to jump right into it. But my name is Pete Weldy. I'm the Regional Administrator for the Administration for Children and Families in Region 9 in San Francisco, although I'm not actually in San Francisco today. I'm in Washington, D.C. for a series of meetings, but we'll be heading back home tomorrow. You're at the right place if you're tuning in for a webinar on understanding and responding to labor trafficking. It's an issue that's near and dear to my heart and all of yours, judging by the number of attendees here. The webinar is guided, of course, by the National Action Plan to Combat Human Trafficking and the National Human Trafficking Prevention Framework. Both of these resources, we'll share those afterward, as well as a bunch of other great stuff. So I just want to thank a few people before we get started, to some of our planning partners and colleagues, including the Region 9 U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Human Trafficking Work Group, our own ACF Office on Trafficking in Persons, the U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division, and the Arizona State University Office of Sex Trafficking Intervention and Research. I also just want to give a special shout out to someone on my team, Emily Hughes, who's done a lot of work to get this webinar off the ground. So really want to say appreciation to her. A few housekeeping things. The webinar is being recorded. And like I mentioned, the PowerPoints, the panelists, the bios, contact information, a list of a bunch of resources will be shared following the webinar. If you have questions throughout, we will have a Q&A time at the end of the webinar. And you can use the Q&A feature to submit questions, and we will go through those during. And then if there are any follow-ups, we can be sure to follow up after the presentations. You're all muted unless there's other discussion, so you don't have to worry about that. And without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to our first presenter, a really good friend of mine who we actually didn't realize that we were in the same building in DC. So I ran upstairs in the last 10 minutes to give her a hug, but she's one of my favorite people. She and I got to know each other during a pretty stressful time in 2021 when there was a surge of unaccompanied youth, and we were standing up emergency sites all over the country to make sure that they were being reunified with their sponsors, families in the United States. And that's where I met Lauren. I said that we're trauma bonded. But she is now back at her normal role at the Office on Trafficking in Persons, where she serves as the Child Trafficking Prevention and Protection Coordinator. And without further ado, Lauren, my friend, you can take it from here.
You're so kind, Pete. It's I'm honored to be here, and agreed. Thank you so much to everyone who put this together. Really special shout out to Emily Hughes for all of her work on this. I'm grateful to be on today with my colleagues, Joanna Mateo, as well as Monica Rousey and Lauren Purnell. They are part of our prevention team here at the Office on Trafficking in Persons, or OTIP, and Monica and Lauren are your specific points of contact in Region 9. So following this presentation, of course, you can reach out to me and the resources that I will be providing to you, but just know that Monica and Lauren are really there to support you all and work with you. So I'm just going to give them a moment to wave and say hello. I see Lauren is on, and yeah, while we're not always able to physically be everywhere, just know that we are partners with you in this work, and we are so grateful to be here today. So I am going to share my screen and attempt to, I should say, and go through a little bit about the HHS Office on Trafficking in Persons, or OTIP, and talk a little bit about the resources that we have available specifically to respond to labor trafficking. I'm also going to spend some time in the beginning talking about labor trafficking and talking about definitions. One thing I do want to flag is I've heard a couple of times today that my sound has been going in and out. So if that happens, please let me know. And I will make sure to address that. All right, we will get going. So the Office on Trafficking in Persons, or OTIP, is located within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the Administration for Children and Families. We were created in June of 2015. So we are a little past 9-year anniversary. And we started based on the premise that trafficking, has always been addressed through this criminal justice framework. And it's so imperative and important that we start addressing trafficking from a human services public health framework. So how do we prevent trafficking from occurring? And then should it occur, if someone does experience human trafficking, how do we ensure that we're helping individuals and survivors rebuild their lives and become self-sufficient? So our office has three major functions: protection, prevention, and research and policy. My specific role is within the protection division, and a lot of what I'm going to be discussing today is related to protection work. And so protection is that response piece to human trafficking. So that's where all of our victim service and assistance activities are. Our grant programs, we have both community grant programs in various locations throughout the United States, as well as national grant programs, including Aspire for children and youth, and our TVAP, or Trafficking Victims Assistance Program for adults. And then we have, of course, the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Then we have our prevention division, which Joanna, Monica, and Lauren are members of. Our prevention division has all of our training and technical assistance, our SORTA health and wellness programming, survivor engagement, public awareness, regional coordination, which Monica and Lauren specifically support on, and our prevention education HYPE grant programs. We've been working with colleagues in Region 9 on some of our HYPE grants, and so if you have any questions about that, let us know. And then our research and policy division, which is pretty self-explanatory. So this next section, I'm going to be giving definitions of labor trafficking. And I know we talked about it at the start. We are going to have some time for questions and answers at the end. So if you have any questions or need any clarification about anything I'm talking about, please put it in the Q&A box. I see Emily put a note in the chat, so perfect timing. So yeah, we're going to just dive in a little bit on labor trafficking. I know it's almost the end of the week on an afternoon, so it's a lot of information to take on, but I hope that this gives a little bit more insight into what is labor trafficking. So when we think about human trafficking is either sex trafficking or labor trafficking. So sex trafficking is sex act in exchange for something of value. If it's a child, there doesn't have to be any force, fraud, or coercion. And if it's an adult, there does. Today, we are talking about the other side, which is labor trafficking. So I don't have any information on the slides about sex trafficking. I'm really going to dive in specifically to the definitions of labor trafficking. So labor trafficking, the way that I explain it, or the way that I best understand it in my brain, is that labor trafficking is either forced or compelled labor. So forced work or compelled work. And sometimes people struggle calling it simply forced labor because sometimes someone isn't forced. They're not, actually hit or harmed physically, but they're coerced or psychologically coerced. So that's why breaking it up into forced or compelled labor can be really helpful. When we talk about it, we're talking about the federal definition of labor trafficking, which is the recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining of a child or adult. In this case, I have child because that's a lot of the work that I do in child trafficking role, for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. And this last bullet, I think, really helps explain what is labor trafficking in a little bit more detail. So labor trafficking occurs when any individual is forced, threatened, or tricked into providing a labor or service once or more than once. So it can happen one time. A child or an adult, for example, could be walking down the street and someone could say, "You have to sell these drugs for me or I'm going to kill you." And so that child or adult sells the drugs. They may never see that person again, but that one-time encounter is enough to say that that child or adult has been labor trafficked. Now, so we want to emphasize that once or more than once, because so often when we think of forced or compelled labor, we think of someone being held against their will and forced to work over and over. And while that absolutely can be an example of labor trafficking, often it is that one-time situation. Another thing I wanted to make sure to add is that sometimes the individual is forced to work to pay off a debt. So if there's a debt associated with a forced labor or a debt that keeps increasing, and no matter how much that person works, that debt continues to increase, that would be another form of labor trafficking. So don't worry, we're going to break these definitions down more, but I just wanted to give those overview points as we talk through more in this section. So when we take a case of labor trafficking, when we receive information about labor trafficking, we look at what's called the AMP model, or the action means purpose model. Because the federal law is a lot of jargon, a lot of words, sometimes it helps to break it down into something structured. So labor trafficking is the recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. When we take that definition and we get information, so for example, the case I talked about earlier, let's say an adult, a female minor, 15, is walking down the street. A gang member says, "I'm going to kill you if you don't sell these drugs for me," and so she sells the drugs. We would look and we would say we need one action, one means, and one purpose in our AMP model in order to say that that child, that girl, is a victim of labor trafficking. So in that situation, for the action, we would say recruiting, because she was singled out and made to do the act. For the means, we would say coercion, because she was threatened to be killed. And for purpose, we would say involuntary servitude. Another thing that we want to help explain is that the actual work or service or labor doesn't have to occur for it to be labor trafficking. For someone to be a victim, there has to be a scheme. So what I mean by that is, let's say someone is recruited to come across the border. They're told, hey, if you come and travel here to the United States, we will set up this great job for you, and you have this great opportunity, you're going to live here. And so they get to the border, and then they find out the real plan is that they're going to be harmed and hurt and forced to work every day and pay off the debt. In that situation, the person has not yet worked to pay off that debt, but we can show that that individual was transported for the purpose of the forced labor, for the purpose of the peonage or the debt bondage or involuntary servitude. So when you're looking at a case and someone tells you they were threatened to do something, or they were about to have to go do this thing, it's always good to look a little bit deeper and understand maybe this is actually a labor trafficking scheme that hasn't yet happened yet. And so that there's a role that can be played in terms of safety planning for prevention, but that person may also be eligible for supportive services. I'm going to talk about that a bit more. So what I've done in these next 3 slides, and I'm going to make sure that you all get this slide deck, is I've broken down these 3 columns from the AMP model. The action means purpose. So the actions for labor trafficking are recruitment, harboring, transporting, provision, or obtaining of a person. And I have explanations of what each of those are. So recruitment of a person is, were they singled out? Were they made to do something? Harboring of a person is, were they isolated? Were they confined? Did someone follow them? Sometimes some people explain that they were stalked by someone over and over, or they were monitored. Someone was following their movements. They were constantly texting them, and they felt they were harbored for the purpose of working for that individual. Transportation of a person is, was that person moved from one location to another? Provision of a person for forced labor is if that person was provided out to a third-party person or employer. And then obtaining of a person is, was the person forcibly taken by an individual or grabbed for the purpose of being subjected to forced labor? Next, in that middle column of the AMP model, we have the means. And so that's force, coercion, or fraud. Force is physical, so sexual assaults, beatings, physical confinement, isolation. Coercion is psychological, so that's threats of serious harm, psychological manipulation, climate of fear, threatening life or safety of a person, withholding legal documents, increasing or compounding debt, witnessing harm to others, abuse or threatened abuse of the legal system. And then fraud is deception or false promises, use of fraudulent travel documents, fraudulent employment offers, withholding wages, etc. And then finally, we have that final column in the AMP model, purpose. So that's involuntary servitude, which is forced labor with threat of harm for noncompliance. We also see situations of involuntary sexual servitude as well as domestic servitude. So an involuntary servitude of domestic servitude is when someone is forced to perform chores or labor services often within a home environment. And that is a form of involuntary servitude called domestic servitude. We also see cases of involuntary sexual servitude. So this is not sex trafficking because there's no commercial value. However, if someone is made to engage in sex acts over and over and perform a service that happens to be sexual in nature, that could be actually considered labor trafficking in the form of sexual servitude. It's a little confusing, but it can be helpful to understand that situations in which an individual is forced to engage in sex acts may also fall under the definition of labor trafficking. Next, we have debt bondage, and that is a labor connected to a debt that increases or never decreases. Then we have peonage. This is labor with threat of harm for noncompliance. So you have involuntary servitude plus a debt. So someone is working to pay off a debt, and they're also being threatened to be harmed or killed in some way. And it's not necessarily increasing, or there's not necessarily a high interest rate like debt bondage, but there is some type of forced labor associated with the debt. And then finally, slavery is when an individual is owned for the purpose of performing labor or services. Okay, so that's the definition. When we have a case, of labor trafficking, we often see it on a spectrum of labor exploitation. So all forms of labor trafficking are labor exploitation, but sometimes labor exploitation is not labor trafficking. And so what that means is someone may be working at a job and they're not being paid what they're promised. They're having pay withheld. They're not getting meal breaks. They have lack of safe water or a toilet. So there might be violations occurring. And my colleague at the U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division is going to be talking a lot more about forms of labor exploitation, forms of labor violation. But what could bring labor exploitation into that category of labor trafficking is, again, that ANT model, thinking about the purpose of, is there that forced labor or compelled labor? So, excuse me. Are there threats related to debt or expenses? Excuse me, I just lost my voice. Are there threats related to debt or expenses? Threats or use of violence? Is the individual being demoralized, intimidated, controlled? Are they being sexually assaulted in relation to the work? Or are they being sexually assaulted over and over in the form of sexual servitude? Are they being told that something could happen to them and that something with the law could happen to them if they don't comply? Or are they being beaten in some way? So all of those situations would then bring that case into a case of labor trafficking. And something that I will say, so in my role, in one of the things that our office works on is called the child eligibility process. And I'm going to be talking about this in a bit, but there is a federal law that requires individuals to report trafficking to our office for children. And we get thousands of cases a year of potential trafficking. A majority of those cases are labor trafficking cases. And often what we see is initially, those cases present as labor exploitation. Initially, the person comes across a child that has been paid less than their promise. Maybe they're working in an unsafe situation. They're working all night. And that might bring that case into a situation of labor trafficking. So as you build rapport with that child, as you build to understand the case, it may bring that case further into a case of labor trafficking. So what we say is, if you're seeing a situation of labor exploitation, there might be labor trafficking occurring, and connecting that individual to services, helping them know, there's resources available to you, there's support available to you, helping them know what their rights are can help prevent a situation of labor trafficking. Okay, so reporting and assistance. I'm going to be talking about some supportive services and assistance available through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, our office, the Office on Trafficking in Persons. This is not an exhaustive list. There's so many supportive services available. And if you have any questions, again, you can reach out to us here at OTIP. But I just wanted to go through a few things available to individuals who have experienced or may have experienced labor trafficking. So the first is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. This is a great resource, particularly for individuals who may not speak English because there's 200 plus languages available through the National Human Trafficking Hotline. It's confidential. It's 24/7 and it's toll free. Individuals can connect to the hotline through call, text, live chat, and it's available to individuals who are working with someone who may have experienced trafficking, a survivor of trafficking, as well as someone that might have a tip or have seen a situation of trafficking occurring. So just know that this is a resource available to any person who has those concerns. The advocates on the phone can do crisis planning, safety planning, and connect those individuals to local resources and supports in their area. The next section, I'm going to be talking about reporting requirements and services for children. One process that I want to talk about, this is for all children, anyone under the age of 18. Federal law has updated the definition of child abuse in CAPTA to include both labor and sex trafficking. So if you come across a situation of potential labor trafficking of a minor, you always want to make sure that first and foremost, you follow your state and local child welfare reporting requirements. Obviously, first you want to safety plan with the child, make sure they're safe, get that child in a safe space, but making sure to work with your local child welfare system to get them connected to supportive services. And then the second is actually on the left, and that's our office, and it's a child eligibility process. There is a reporting requirement that all federal, state, and local officials must refer all cases of potential labor or sex trafficking among foreign national children, so this would include unaccompanied children, to our office within 24 hours. Like I mentioned, we get cases every day through this process, and we get about 4,000 to 4,500 potential referrals a year. So this process comes from the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and once we get that case, our team of child protection specialists actually use that AMP model that I was sharing before for both sex and labor trafficking and assess whether the child is eligible for refugee benefits. That includes Medicaid, TANF, food stamps, FAFSA, cash assistance. They assess the case and then will issue what's called an eligibility letter, giving them the child a benefit status of a refugee. We also will connect them to case management services. So this is that child eligibility process. Again, I'm going to give you these slides so you'll have them if you have a case like this, and I can also answer more questions. I just want to make sure we have time. And in that process, these are the common case trends that we see among children that are foreign nationals, and often the trafficking occurred in home country 5 years ago. It occurred during their journey to the United States or here in the United States. So we see a lot of domestic and sexual servitude cases. This is where a child is held against their will and they're forced to perform household duties, chores, tasks. And then again, sexual servitude is when sexual assault falls into a situation of labor trafficking. And that's when someone is forced to engage in sex acts over and over. Sometimes it could be a situation of domestic violence or interpersonal violence. It can also be a situation where a child is captured during their journey, held in a warehouse, forced to engage in sex acts. Those situations in which there's not a commercial value exchange or offered, so it's not sex trafficking, but the individual is forced to engage in sex acts in a servitude. We also see a lot of cases of forced criminality. This is a situation similar to what I explained when a gang member is walking down the street, forces someone to sell drugs for them, or they're going to kill them. It's when an individual is forced to perform a labor or service that is illegal. So examples often that we receive through the child eligibility process for foreign national children are where a gang member or cartel forces them to do something. But we also see these cases where for children where they're forced to, here in the United States or anywhere in the world, where they're forced to sell drugs, they're forced to steal a car, they're forced to perform lookout duties for a gang, really anything that is criminal in nature. We also see in these cases a lot of forced labor and smuggling cases. So children are forced to work by an individual connected to someone who brought them into the United States, often to pay off debt or other expenses. We do see a lot of familial trafficking in the form of labor trafficking. So it's where the child is forced to work for a caregiver, whether that's in their home country or here in the United States, and they're often forced to pay off debt or other expenses. And then forced labor on journey. We see a lot of cases where children are held for ransom, they're kidnapped, they're extorted, but in that experience, they're also forced to work. So these are some common potential indicators that we hear from individuals when they're working with clients. Maybe there's a lot of situations where a child or a youth is not enrolled in school or attending school regularly. The child or adult is feeling a lot of concern about having to repay a debt and feeling that they don't have a choice. Maybe they're traveling alone to work. They mention that they don't have possession of their documents. They're isolated. They're unable to communicate or interact with others. They're frequently moving. So these are just some indicators. This isn't all, and these indicators could mean other things, but just some examples of some indicators related to labor trafficking, particularly through our child eligibility process. So if you have any case like this, if you have any potential case of labor trafficking, maybe it's one of these things or it's something else, you're working with a foreign national minor, we have what's called a Shepherd case management system. Again, it's a 24-hour reporting requirement for trafficking that occurred in any country at any age. And you don't have to get this to us within 24 hours. We just have to get it before the child's 18th birthday. You'll refer that case to us through our Shepherd case management system. This is the QR code for Shepherd. I also have the link here. You'll create an account in Shepherd, submit the request for assistance to us. Again, this is sex or labor trafficking. Today's presentation is just about labor trafficking, so I just wanted to clarify that. And then our team, our child protection team here at OTIP, will review the information on the case, correspond with you back and forth, and then if there are trafficking concerns, they'll issue a letter to the child, making them eligible to apply for refugee benefits, as well as connect them to case management services through our Aspire program. Again, I'll get these slides to you, but here is the information for Shepherd. Oh, and one thing I do want to mention, our child protection team is incredible. And from 9 to 5 Eastern every day, they do manage a child case staffing line where if you have a potential case of trafficking and you're not sure if you should submit that to us, you can reach out and discuss the case with us, and we can chat through it with you. These are the benefits that the child is eligible for in terms of refugee benefits. And then another thing I just wanted to quickly highlight is if you're working with a foreign national adult who has not already received an eligibility letter or already has a case with us, they're now an adult, and they have a T visa application, so a bona fide determination or continued presence, they can then receive a certification letter from our office that certifies them to also apply for refugee benefits. So we at OTIP are not reviewing the adult's case to make that determination, but we receive that information from our colleagues at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security through the T visa, bona fide determination, or CP, and then we can issue what's called a certification letter. If an adult doesn't yet have one of these, but there are potential trafficking concerns, we can also automatically refer them to the TVAP case management program. So this slide is talking about Aspire and TVAP. Aspire is for foreign national children. TVAP is for foreign national adults. TVAP and Aspire have regional coordinators. You have a new amazing regional coordinator in Region 9. And you also have a team that is over our TVAP and Aspire program. So if you have any questions about who it is, let us know. But in addition to providing regional coordination support, which includes working with child welfare, working with benefit issuing agencies, kind of helping troubleshoot complicated situations, they can also assign the child or an adult a case manager that can provide cash assistance, support with emergency needs, housing, rent, utilities, helping with medical expenses, legal services, kind of all the things listed here. Here's a little bit more about Aspire and TVAP coordination. Of course, we have all of our regional coordination support, our Aspire case management services for foreign national minors, and then our TVAP case management for foreign national adults and youth, 18 to 24. I have the emails and the phone number here for Aspire and TVAP if you want to just reach out to them directly for anything. And again, I'll get these slides to you so you have them. A few more resources I want to highlight before we head to our next amazing speaker, who I'm very excited for you to hear from. Carlo has some great insights. Here are some child eligibility resources. So there's a recorded webinar and also some information about our monthly training that we have the first Wednesday of every month talking about this process. as well as a 3-minute video on our child eligibility process in a SOAR to health and wellness online module. Also a link to Shepherd again, information about how to staff a case, some toolkits. These are 3 really great toolkits about working with foreign national children and youth who have experienced trafficking, a link to our Look Beneath the Surface public awareness campaign materials, as well as a handout that takes you through the benefit process for using that letter to apply for Social Security and all the different benefits. Another support and resource that we offer is our child protection team. Like I mentioned, we are here if you're coming across a really complicated case with a foreign national minor or adult. We, as well as the Aspire and TF regional coordination team, are here to support you and troubleshoot. We also offer trainings. We have module-based trainings and other resources, so please reach out to us. Here's a little snapshot of our new handout. I guess it's no longer new, but it always feels new to me. But here's a snapshot of it. It kind of talks through all the different benefits someone's eligible for and the process of what to do once the child or adult get the letter. And these are some more resources for children and youth that are related to human trafficking. And then finally, something I'm really excited about, our prevention team just came out with, is working hard on getting these out, but there are new Look Beneath the Surface public awareness materials. You can also find them on our website. Here's a few related to labor trafficking, some posters. There's a variety. These are specifically related to individuals working because they're in an unsafe situation with limited options, or just telling them about what their rights are, that they have the right to live and work safely. And here are some other resources. We have some resources for individuals through the United for Ukraine process, disasters and emergencies. Often individuals are forced to work or experience labor trafficking during or following a disaster or emergency. And we also have hotline cards. I believe we have these in almost 32 languages, both hotlines for youth and adults. And those are all on our website. And again, all these links are here for you. Connect with us. Here is our contact information. And with that, I am very excited to introduce you to Carlo Placencia. He is a Human Trafficking Initiatives Lead Project Specialist with Interface Children and Family Services. Carlo will be presenting information about his agency's participation in the OTIP award recipient and grant program called Lighthouse, Services Outreach and Awareness for Labor Trafficking Demonstration Program. A really simple, easy way to talk about it is Lighthouse. So Carlo, I'm gonna pass it to you, and thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Let me just go ahead and pull up my screen here. But as you just all heard, I'm here from Interfaith Children and Family Services. We're an organization located in Ventura County, California. And today I'm here to talk to you about the Lighthouse Project. So just a quick little introduction about myself. My name is Carlo Placencia. I'm the lead project specialist under the HTPI department at Interface, which stands for Human Trafficking Prevention and Intervention. And I'm part of the initiatives team that took on the Lighthouse Project. So today, just a quick little overview about Interface. We have been established since 1973, so that means we did just recently have our 50-year anniversary. But we're an agency that basically provides wraparound services within Ventura County. So that includes emergency response to victims, especially of human trafficking, including both sex and labor. Our general mission statement and what we really strive for is to strengthen children, families, individuals, and communities to be safe, healthy, and thriving through comprehensive social services. And those services kind of range. We have a lot of different things we offer. Of course, we have human trafficking prevention and intervention, but we also kind of help out with mental health and trauma treatment, domestic violence and child abuse prevention, youth crisis and homelessness services, justice services, and of course, the infamous 211 informational hotline that you can call to get information. So that's just kind of a little overview of Interface as we kind of talk about this. Now we're going to move into the Lighthouse Project. So Lighthouse Project, we received this, I believe, 2 years ago almost, and it's a project that was built to focus on building capacity to identify and support adult foreign nationals who have experienced labor trafficking within the Central Coast region of California through 3 approaches: outreach, public awareness, and the provision of services, right? So when we talk about the Central Coast of California, that's a very broad term. So what we mean is we're actually targeting 4 counties. We have Ventura County, Santa Barbara County, San Luis Obispo County, and Monterey County. And within those counties, we're trying to build relationships with other agencies to be able to provide information, trainings, and stuff like that. And of course, once again, to just reiterate, the purpose of the project is to focus on adult foreign nationals who've experienced labor trafficking. And the reason why we want to highlight this is because, one, it's very hard to identify from what it seems. So, and there's a lot of reasons for that, because when it comes to the initial aspect of people coming to a new area, it could be very challenging, right? So when we talk about human trafficking, specifically labor trafficking, there's involvement during the early stages, right? So you have the journey, recruitment, and then facilitation of travel. However, when they arrive, there's an additional barrier, or barriers, I should say, that could prevent an individual from receiving assistance or knowing about assistance that exists. So some of those barriers could be language and cultural barriers. You might have lack of reliable information. There could be economic and social challenges of integration. You could have maybe limited knowledge on the local surrounding resources. So that really does play a big role as to why individuals can't actually go out and receive help. And of course, one of the biggest ones that we commonly see is the lack of support networks, including friends and family. Because chances are, if you go somewhere new without support, it becomes very difficult to integrate and actually understand your environment. But kind of continue on to why, we're focusing on this is that there is a higher number that does seem to be impacted. So as you can see from this little graph I have over here in the right corner, this is coming from the Polaris, specifically out of their 2021 statistics. And it does highlight the fact that in terms of likely victims, foreign nationals made up 73%. And that's a very big number that compared to domestic, and the unknown is still unsorted. So another thing I want to highlight as to why we do this is the migrant workers face a higher risk of forced labor than other workers. So there is higher risk, therefore we want to be able to spotlight and be sure that we can identify individuals who might be trafficked, especially labor trafficking. But then the other one is also Polaris quote, and it reads, recent migration/relocation remain the most frequently reported risk factor or vulnerability identified, applying to just over half, 54% of all likely victims with known risk factors vulnerability. This also applied to 93% of likely victims of labor trafficking. So with that said, that just goes to show and highlight the importance of looking for labor trafficking situations. And the way we try to do this with the Lighthouse project is by 3 goals. And those goals are identification and outreach. So this is kind of the step in which we conduct outreach to identify and train third-party providers on how to spot labor trafficking, right? One of the main common ones that we really do is healthcare workers. So we're out there training healthcare workers to be able to provide assistance in the case that they do run into a situation where they might be sitting across an individual who might have been trafficked. And the reason we focus very heavily on healthcare providers is because they are frontline workers and they are more intact to probably run into someone who is being trafficked. Goal 2 is public awareness campaigns. So in this step, we basically just do public awareness activities amongst the same third-party providers. So we go out and we do, tabling events, we do ad campaigns, we do radio shows to make sure that people understand that the resources are indeed out there. And we just try to inform the community of what is happening. And the last one, of course, the case management. So this is where we actually provide the resources. We provide comprehensive, culturally responsive, and linguistically appropriate case management to victims. So I know that was kind of a lot. What I'm going to do for you, I'm going to break it down of how it actually works. So the goal one, the identification outreach. So like I mentioned, we do provide trainings and technical assistance to increase the potential identification of services for labor trafficking victims. When we do this in different ways, there's different types of presentations that are tailored to different groups depending in their field, because I mentioned medical staff being one of them. The other ones could be, maybe immigration attorneys or, something very different, but we tailor it to make sure that it fits what they would see on a daily basis. We also have things where we participate in local community events. So we're out in the community providing resources through pamphlets, hotline cards, informational sheets, know your rights. It's a lot of different information that we give to the community, and we try to be at almost any event that we possibly can, just because Ventura County, for one, is a pretty big county, but we do try to grasp as much as we possibly can. And just to highlight some of those outreach events and what we try to do. So agencies that we reach, of course, we have healthcare agencies here in Ventura County. There's a lot. We have big institutions like Los Robles Medical Center, Regional Medical Center, but at the same time, we also target small clinics just because there are chances that small clinics, could potentially also run into trafficking. So we try to cover as much ground as we possibly can. The second type of agencies or kind of groups that we do communicate a lot with are human trafficking task forces, of course, just so we can keep updated and potentially offer trainings, specifically labor trafficking trainings, if the opportunity presents itself. We're also a lot in a lot of different organizations that do food drive clinics or mobile resources. The reason being is because they go towards the community. It's not, it's a different approach from where an individual has to come to an event. These groups go to the community, which I think is an interesting approach, and we try to be there to also provide our resources. And some of those events that we attend are like the MyCop. We partner with MyCop a lot, and one of the things they do is the food drive, and we're always there. We have a very good connection. We also have Swamp Meet Justice, which is an event at the end of every month on the last Sunday, and basically we show up. It's basically a giant gathering of different resources, and community individuals go and participate and learn about different resources that are out there. We also have safety fairs and back to schools events. The reason why we attend these is just because there are different areas in which parents per se could be at, individuals that live in impacted areas. We try to be at those events, and those tend to be the events that we see in Ventura County. So we try to cover all that ground. And then talking about the presentations, right now there are two main presentations. We have Labor Trafficking 101, which is a generic kind of overview of labor trafficking. And this is open to anybody. This is kind of a public awareness presentation. It's offered both in English and Spanish. But then we also have Labor Trafficking 101 for medical professionals. Like I said, it is a 60-minute presentation that provides an in-depth introduction to labor trafficking. So it includes a lot of different things, of course, the definitions, where it could take place, things to look out for, and the resources within their area, right? So, for example, giving a presentation to, let's just say, Monterey County would look a lot different than giving it to Ventura County just because the distance, but we try to tailor it as much as we can with the resources that are locally there for individuals. But moving on, we're going to talk about goal 2. So goal 2 is public awareness. And this is where we really try to kind of be in the community without being in the community. So we have like public transportation ads going on right now. So we're in 3 counties: Ventura County, Santa Barbara, and Monterey. And these are some of the snippets that you could see here. They're just very simple. They have a QR code. They have a phone number that they can call to learn more about trafficking, or in case that they are, this will also direct them into our direct line to be able to take that call. And at the bottom here, we have Radio Indígena 94.1 FM. On the next slide, you're going to hear a little snippet of it. And I apologize if I can't stop the audio, but on the screen, you will see a display of the transcript of what's being said.
¿Su empleador retiene salarios por su alquiler o comida? ¿Le han quitado el acceso a su pasaporte u otros documentos? ¿El trabajo que le prometieron resultó ser diferente de lo que esperaba? ¿La vivienda que su empleador le ha proveído está en condiciones de sobrepoblación y de inseguridad? Si es así, usted puede ser víctima de trata laboral. La trata laboral afecta a millones de personas en todo el mundo. Es una forma de trata de personas que le puede ocurrir a cualquier persona.
I just want to give you guys a little snippet of what was being said, but we have that PSA going on, and the reason being is because we want to target a different population. Because here in Ventura County, we do have a high rate of individuals who don't necessarily just speak Spanish, but also speak Mixteco, which is a language that doesn't actually have a written component to it. So we're trying to reach them in a different way in terms of broadcasting so that they can listen to it. But yeah, so that's kind of sums up our public awareness right now. Of course, we're also on social media, providing valuable information online. But the last goal is case management, and this looks very simple. So basically, here in Ventura County, let's just say we get a call, so we receive a referral. What ends up happening right after that is that we have a direct line to which the call will come in. We have a advocate. He would take basically an intake and assessment to basically determine the trafficking type, and then basically see what resources they can qualify for. And so basically, once the client meets the eligibility of the Lighthouse program specifically, they are admitted into the program. And once there, the HT advocate will connect once again with the client to basically go over an action plan to make sure that they're taken care of and what resources they need. And of course, the last step is them receiving the resources and making sure that their situation is being taken care of. And what kind of services we're able to provide? Well, we kind of do a lot of different services. Of course, the case management is upfront, but depending on their situation, of course, it could change a lot because some individuals might not need specific resources like others might. So we do offer financial support, and that can be in the form of maybe, let's just say, dental assistance or maybe educational assistance. We have basic needs that can look like just groceries to clothes. We have relocation assistance, interpreter and translator services. So we partner with MyCop as a partner, especially when we're trying to communicate with the Mixteco community. They provide the interpreter because they are trained in that field. We also have legal services, and of course, emergency and transitional shelters, educational needs, mental health treatment, transportation assistance, and much more. But it does look very different for in-county versus out-of-county, which is something I do want to highlight. So this program, this project, targets 4 main counties. Unfortunately, as the provider, we can't be in Monterey. So the way it looks like is for clients outside of Ventura County, we connect them with local resources with partners we have established, and we assist them with limited services. So that could be in the form of, say they need something from Target. We can afford to like give them gift cards to Target, Walmart, grocery stores. And at the same time, we also provide financial assistance. So there could be medical health expenses. There could be relocation assistance. But yeah, so when it comes to outside of Ventura County, it looks a little bit different. But we make sure that we have those resources still in place in the case that we can provide something. And on the inside of Ventura County, that's where we get the direct support, just because we are located in Ventura County and we can provide the comprehensive case management service. And those, of course, from the list before, basic needs, education, childcare, emergency and transitional housing, life skills, medical services, therapy, and much more. So yeah, that kind of just sums up the project. It's a great project. We're making good strides in it, and we're trying to really up the identification numbers for individuals who are being labor trafficked, because we know they're out there. Is just like I've mentioned earlier in the presentation, it is a little harder to spot. But the thing is, it is working, it's going, and we're happy with the progress we've made so far. But yeah, so I'll just leave you with that. Here's my contact information if you want to reach out and learn more about the project. Or if you happen to be in California along that Central Coast and you're representing an agency we haven't reached out to, please feel more than welcome to reach out. And I appreciate being here and allowing me to talk about it. Now I'm going to pass it back to Lauren.
Thanks so much, Carlo. Thank you for such an incredible presentation. I am now going to pass it to my colleague, Naixa Franquis, who serves as a senior advisor in the Office of Regional Enforcement and Support of the Wage and Hour Division at the U.S. Department of Labor. I am so grateful day in and day out to partner with Naixa and her team, and really eager for you all to learn more about what her division does and all the supportive services available to individuals experiencing labor exploitation and labor violations. So I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Let's try this screen share again. And I think you are all able to see my presentation. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Naixa Franquis, and I work for the U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour. I have worked with the division for the last 21 years, and most of my work has been performed in the field directly interacting with workers. I am happy to be here with you this afternoon to talk about the work our division does in preventing and eliminating labor exploitation and human trafficking. Just want to make sure that you're all able to see the screen. Hopefully
Yes,
somebody will. Okay, wonderful. All right, so let's get started. A little bit of who we are. The Wage and Hour Division is responsible for administering and enforcing a number of federal laws. And these laws set basic labor standards such as minimum wage, overtime pay requirements, child labor rules, family medical leave, certain agricultural worker protections, and employment standards and worker protections under the Immigration Nationality Act guest worker visa programs. And this includes the payment of minimum wages and overtime, youth employment standards, job protections for time taken for the birth of a child or caring for sick family members, housing and transportation standards for farm workers, payment of prevailing wage rates for federal funded construction and service contract work, and standards for hiring and paying workers temporarily in the United States under H-2A, H-1B, and H-2B visas. So to put it into context, collectively, these federal laws cover most private, state, and local government employment and protect over 165 million workers in more than 11 million establishments nationwide. We do our work through a combination of enforcement, outreach, and compliance assistance that promote compliant behaviors in order to impact compliance levels. These protections apply to workers regardless of their immigration status. And as you will see in the next slide, we do not ask workers about their immigration status during our enforcement actions or during the provision of services and information to workers. So Wage and Hour focuses on industries where data and evidence shows us that violations are high. And workers are less likely to complain. And those are the type of industries that you will see on this slide. Our investigations are conducted across industries that are historically vulnerable to labor exploitation. And that includes restaurants, construction, food processing, manufacturing, agriculture, and the garment sector. These vulnerable workers may include migrant workers, women, and workers with limited English proficiency. We are sensitive to the importance of cultural diversity and competence, And to meet the needs of these individuals, we are very proud to say that a high percentage of our staff are bilingual. The objective of these investigations is to improve compliance with the employment laws that you just heard about in those businesses, industries, and localities. So now we're going to discuss some of the worker protections that are most likely to be violated in these industries. So we will start with the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA. This is one of the main laws that we enforce here at the Wage and Hour Division, and it requires the payment of the current federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour. It also requires the payment of overtime at time and 1/2 a worker's regular rate of pay for hours worked over 40 in a work week. Employers are required to keep accurate records for employees, including a breakdown of daily and weekly hours worked, wages paid, and deductions made. The Fair Labor Standards Act also includes protections for young workers under the child labor provisions of the Act. And it also includes anti-retaliation provisions, which we will talk about later. One way that employers attempt to evade the FLSA is to misclassify workers as independent contractors. So misclassification occurs when a worker is considered an employee under the law, but is treated as an independent contractor by the employer. The FLSA applies whenever there is an employment relationship between an employer and an employer. And we have found a substantial number of workers to be incorrectly classified as independent contractors when they should, in fact, be classified as employees. And this can result in minimum wage and overtime violations, among other harms to the workers. Misclassification can occur in any industry, but it is specifically prevalent in construction, janitorial work, home care, childcare, transportation and warehousing, and meat and poultry processing industries. As we previously mentioned, the FLSA includes youth employment or child labor provisions. We just want to highlight that the safety of workers and reducing the incidence of child labor violations are a top priority for the Wage and Hour Division. And we have a focus in ensuring that children can have meaningful work experiences, that they are safe, and that those work experiences do not curtail their educational opportunities. We do want to say that child labor violations are very rarely reported by the children who are being exploited. And it is very critical that we ensure other workers are able to come forward and report child labor violations when they see them. So this particular slide will illustrate the most basic child labor requirements for non-agricultural jobs. And generally, to summarize, the minimum age of employment is 14, although there are some exceptions and exemptions for children under the age of 14 that allows them, for example, to babysit on a casual basis, deliver newspapers, and work as actors or performers, for example. So the way that the Fair Labor Standards Act groups these categories is into two categories. So 14 and 15-year-olds are in one group, and 16 and 17-year-olds are in the second group. So simply stated, employees are age 14 and 15 may only work outside of school hours. And the number of hours that they are able to work depends on whether the school is in session or not. So for example, if the school is in session, 14 and 15-year-olds may not work more than 18 hours in a week. However, when school is not in session, 14 and 15-year-olds may work up to 40 hours in each week. Additionally, in addition to the number of hours collectively that they can work in a week, they can only work between the hours of 7 in the morning and 7 o'clock at night, except for the time period from June 1st through Labor Day, when the evening hours are extended to 9 p.m. Also, 14 and 15-year-olds may only work in specific non-manufacturing, non-mining, and non-dangerous jobs. So basically, if their work is not permitted, they cannot engage in that work. And that means they cannot work in manufacturing, mining, processing, baking or cooking, working as public messengers, construction work, including roofing, use of clean power-driven equipment, loading and unloading equipment, working in freezers or coolers, or engaging in door-to-door sales. Now, once they turn 16, then they may perform any work that is not otherwise considered dangerous, and they may do so with no limit to the number of hours that they work. And of course, these child labor regulations do not apply to any employee that is 18 years or older. So what are these occupations that are considered dangerous? They're here on the screen. The Secretary of Labor has determined these jobs to be too dangerous for children under the age of 18, and they are not allowed to perform any of these jobs at any time, not even once, unless an exemption applies. There are 17 hazardous occupations in total, and this is work that is not performed on farms. So a little bit more about the child labor restrictions in farm jobs. Once a child reaches 16, the child labor rules no longer apply to farm work, and they can do any job on a farm at any time. Children who are 14 and 15 working on farms are restricted once again to work outside of school hours, but for an unlimited number of hours. They are, however, banned from performing work in dangerous jobs. 12 and 13-year-olds may work on farms outside of school hours, and again, also are banned from working in dangerous jobs. However, they must either work on farms where their parents or guardians work, or they must have written consent to work from a parent. And then children under the age of 12 may work outside of school hours in non-dangerous jobs with parental consent, but only on small farms where none of the employees are subject to the provisions of the FLSA. So now that we've discussed child labor provisions, we're going to move on to protections for agricultural workers. And these workers are particularly vulnerable to labor exploitation, as they are often employed in remote areas, and some, including temporary non-immigrant agricultural workers or H2A workers, are dependent upon their employer to provide basic needs, such as housing, transportation, food, and other necessities. Further, H2A worker status in the country is fully dependent and controlled by the employer, making it less likely for these workers to report abuse and other violations of the laws enforced by Wage and Hour. As you can see on the slide, we protect workers through the enforcement of a number of laws. Those laws apply whether they are H2A workers, US workers in corresponding employment, and that the definition of that is those workers performing the same or similar work for the same employer as the H2A workers, or migrant or seasonal worker agricultural workers. And this is under a law that we call the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act, or MISPA, H2A requirements, and field sanitation standards under the Occupational Safety and Health Act. And then finally, a little bit about H2B temporary non-agricultural workers. We also enforce regulations that provide protections for temporary non-agricultural employees with H2B visas. I would just like to highlight that these workers face many of the similar vulnerabilities as H2A workers, including their dependence on the employer for their status in the country. Typically, a Wage and Hour investigation will examine compliance with the requirements of the H2B program, specifically whether the employer has met the terms and conditions that they attested to in the application for temporary labor certification. Our investigations may also involve other applicable acts enforced by the wage and hour, as noted on the slide. All right, so this slide intends to illustrate a little bit about our summary, or summarize a little bit about our investigation process. As part of our work, wage and hour investigators enter and inspect an employer's premise, which includes reviewing the payroll, looking at time records, conducting interview with employees to determine whether any person has violated any of the provisions enforced by wage and hour. We also conduct housing and transportation inspections, as well as agricultural field sanitation inspections. And I just want to highlight that oftentimes wage and hour is the first law enforcement agency that workers may come into contact with. A very important step in our investigation process is the interviewing of the workers in private. The purpose of these interviews is to verify that the employer's payroll and time records have been provided to us are in fact accurate, and to determine compliance with the laws that we enforce. They're typically conducted on the employer's premises, but they are conducted in private, and they do not include the employer's participation. As part of our investigation, we not only just talk to current workers, we also contact or may contact former employees to interview them at their homes, through mail, or by telephone. So once we've done all of our fact-finding, we will meet with the employer and or a representative of the employer who has the authority to commit the employer to corrective action if in fact we found violations. And the employer will be advised of what those violations are and how to correct them. And if back wages are owed to employees because of minimum wage, overtime violations, or any of the other protections that we've highlighted under the laws in the previous slides, then we will request payment of those back wages and any other appropriate remedies. So now that you're familiar with what we do and how we do it, let's discuss how we contribute to the prevention and elimination of labor exploitation and human trafficking. We recognize that labor exploitation refers to a broad range of actions and behaviors. So they range from simple wage violations to, as you can see on the slide, potential instances of forced labor. So one of the things that we do is we strive to prevent trafficking by addressing those labor exploitations through the enforcement of laws under our purview, and hopefully before that conduct escalates to labor trafficking. In addition to that, we are a committed partner in implementing the National Action Plan to combat human trafficking. In the previous slide, we share a broad range of actions and behaviors, ranging from your simple wage violations to the potential forced labor. This slide includes other types of actions and behavior that may indicate workers are being exploited. So in addition to the instances or indicators listed on the slide, you may also want to consider conduct that appears to be intended to harm or threaten workers and or interfere with our investigation, falsification of time and payroll records, interference with employee interviews, the use of debt to exert control, and any other facts that suggest heightened control over the workers. So I've mentioned instances where workers are dependent upon the employer for housing, transportation, food, and basic necessities. So we've made the distinction between labor exploitation, and now we are going to talk about our role in detecting and referring human trafficking. So it's important to note that while Wage and Hour does not enforce the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, we are in fact uniquely positioned to detect potential trafficking indicators during the normal course of our investigations. As I mentioned before, as part of our work, our investigators are entering and inspecting the employer's premises. We are conducting housing and transportation inspections and talking to workers. We make every effort through our investigations to be able to report with workers, as we understand that victims of labor exploitation are very often reluctant to reveal or share information with law enforcement. And this, again, for various reasons, including fear of retaliation or a worsening in their working conditions. And workers are often fearful of what will happen to them and what you or others may do to them. So our investigators are trained to detect these potential human trafficking indicators. And these are situations, for example, where an employer has confiscated a worker's passport and visa documents, which oftentimes an employer may do to restrict their movement and prevent them from leaving a work site. And that's just one of many examples we've seen. And so our staff may refer these indicators of trafficking to the Department of Justice Human Trafficking Prosecution Unit, local human trafficking task forces, and other law enforcement partners. I do want to say that we participate in over 80 local human trafficking task forces across the country, where we contribute our expertise to the task forces by providing information on business models and industry practices and even noted geographical trends. Another way that we support the prosecution of trafficking is by helping to calculate restitution for victims of trafficking. And we do that when requested by the prosecuting agency. I do want to say that Wage and Hour will always attempt to pursue the remedies available under the laws that we enforce, including protections from retaliation, ensuring that workers receive their wages, and enforcing provisions that like those found in the Immigration and Nationality Act that prohibit recruiting fees in certain visa programs. We do know that no amount of money will ever make up for the suffering experienced at the hands of traffickers, but restitution and any other wages found due under the protections afforded by the laws we enforce will certainly give victims a chance to rebuild their lives. I would be remiss if I don't say that Wage and Hour is committed to protecting all workers in the United States, including low-wage and immigrant workers who are among the most at risk for violations. As I have mentioned previously, they are particularly vulnerable to workplace abuse because they are often reluctant to speak out about violations of the law for fear of reprisal. An employer is prohibited from retaliating against or threatening to retaliate against workers for exercising or attempting to exercise their rights. And that includes contacting the Wage and Hour Division or cooperating in a Wage and Hour investigation. Immigration-based retaliation or threats of process of law enforcement seek to keep employees from exercising their rights and definitely affect their willingness to report violations and cooperate with a Wage and Hour enforcement action. And finally, I would like to mention that Wage and Hour will also consider completing a certification for UNT visas for victims of qualifying crimes and trafficking. To that end, we have dedicated staff in each region who may answer questions on how to request certification from our agency. This slide provides you with my personal contact information. Feel free to take a picture. The Region 9 is served by our Western Region office, which is located in San Francisco. But again, regardless of where you're located, feel free to contact me through my email and ask any questions. I will be happy to connect you with our local wage and hour district office that may be able to help you, whatever you are. So it was a pleasure visiting with you this afternoon, and I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Pete.
Thank you, Nixa. I've learned a lot actually in your presentation, and just thank you. Thank you to our three presenters for some really great information. And I've really also enjoyed watching the questions come in, and I appreciate Lauren for having already answered a few. There are a few though that we'd like to answer live, and there's still time, of course. We've got about 15 more minutes to do some Q&A. One thing before we get started though, sadly, we were supposed to be joined by Rafael Bautista, who's the vice chair of the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking, and he had some last-second tech challenges. His computer crashed. So he's with us in spirit, I know, and will also be joining us at next week's webinar. So there's still an opportunity to hear from him, which I'm excited about. So let's jump into some Q&A. I know that since I introduced myself, though, there have maybe been 100 new people joined, so I wanted to reintroduce myself really quick. My name's Pete Weldy. I'm the Regional Administrator for the Administration for Children and Families in Region 9 out of San Francisco, where I believe Department of Labor is just a few floors above us, so we work closely together. I also wanted to share and maybe respond to another question briefly that came through from Andrew, kind of about how we're structured. I know that we throw lots of acronyms at all of you. So yes, we are, ACF is a part of the broader United States Department of Health and Human Services. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid is the largest by far of all the agencies and optives. But ACF is actually the second largest agency in HHS, and it includes all of those human services programs in the Health and Human Services Department. That includes our Office on Trafficking in Persons, and includes our Office of Refugee Resettlement, child welfare, child care, you name it, we've got it. So I hope that helps a little bit to give some context for who the Administration for Children and Families is. So let's move to a question. I actually had a question for Lauren that I wanted to ask, and it's related to another question that was in the chat already about the child eligibility process and the certification letters that are sent. My version of that question, Lauren, is about the timeline for receiving the notice and the differences between a bona fide determination and a presumptive one.
That is a great question. So to kind of clarify, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act has been reauthorized many times. And in 2008, it gave the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, so what Pete was just discussing, HHS, ACF, and now OTIP, the authority to make decisions of whether a foreign national child is eligible for benefits and services. So that's why we at HHS and OTIP review those referrals through our Shepherd system, and then are able to issue what's called eligibility letters. Typically, the timeline is really case by case. So if we were to receive a case where a child is in an urgent situation, we've had times where we actually process that case within the hour. We'll process it in a couple of days. But if it's a situation where the child is getting supportive services, they experienced the trafficking many years ago, it's not as urgent, it might take many weeks to process. So it really just depends. It depends on staffing, caseload. There's times where we receive a couple hundred cases in a month, and sometimes we receive many hundreds of cases in a month. So it really, really depends. In terms of the question around the bona fide determination, T visa, continued presence piece, that is processed through the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And so the USCIS will actually process the processing of the T visas, and then we'll get notified by DHS, and they'd be able to issue certification letters to adults. We issue, even though for DHS documentation, it's called certification for children as well, we still would just issue what's called an eligibility letter to a child. There is a new final rule update on bona fide determinations, and I believe USCIS just posted, they just had a new training on this new process that starts on August 28th. will there be processing more bona fide determinations through this final rule. And I believe they have a recording of their training on their website around this, but I am going to make sure to pass along to Pete and Emily a link to our resources about the benefits available to them. So that process is a little bit different. T visas have typically been processed and then given to us within 1.5 to 2 years. And that's when clients are getting those case management services during that time, but the bona fide determinations will be much quicker. I can't speak to that as much because we haven't seen a lot of bona fide determinations in the past. And so that will just kind of figure out what it looks like. So Pete, I hope that helped answer your question.
It definitely did. No, thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that.
No problem.
The other question that's related on the topic of the OTIP letters, the questioner asked, basically shared an example of having screened youth where it sounds like there may have been an instance of trafficking in their home country, and they are identified to come here, and then ORR takes them into custody, and is the intervention that prevents that from happening. Is that still an incident where the child might be eligible?
I am so glad you asked that question. I clicked to answer it live, and so I'm really glad you brought that up. Absolutely. Even if the actual forced labor doesn't occur, if we can show that someone intervened, whether that's law enforcement, ORR, you as the case manager, someone intervened, or the child escaped a situation to avoid actually experiencing the labor trafficking, that's absolutely a case to send to us. So if you have a situation, I see it's an anonymous attendee that put that in the chat box, but please reach out to me and we'll get that case and help you figure out how to process that case in Shepherd. So yes, thanks, Pete.
Great, awesome. Maybe I'll toss one over to maybe Naixa, you might be able to answer it. Amy Yu asked an interesting question, I thought, on whether labor trafficking victims are presumed to be employees and whether their wages would therefore be recoverable if the state law applied.
So I am going to break that question down. So the first part of it is under the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is the law that Wage and Hour enforces, there needs to be an employment relationship for us to be able to recover wages that should have been paid and were not. Under the TVPA, however, which, as I mentioned, Wage and Hour does not enforce, there is language about restitution to victims of trafficking, and Wage and Hour oftentimes is called in to assist with the computation of that restitution, which is determining what wages were appropriate or that worker or that victim would have paid had they not been a victim of trafficking. And that is typically recovered through the prosecution of the human trafficking. If you are wanting to look at what is applicable under state labor law, I really recommend that you contact your state, labor and industries or equivalent of the Wage and Hour division to ask whether or not there is an employment relationship that would allow you to recover. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, we're typically tied to either a 2-year or 3-year statute of limitations. So it's really important to note when was it that the violations occurred so that we're able to better inform you as to what protections may be available through just your typical civil resolution through your state labor agency or with Wage and Hour.
Great, thank you. All right, and keep the questions coming, feel free. Another question for Lauren, it's a two-parter. Maybe just answer the first part first, but do we have any statistics or rough prevalence estimates on how many youth or young adults with disabilities experience trafficking or labor trafficking?
Yeah, that is a great question. I do not have that, but I would love to inquire with my data colleagues at OTIP on that. So if you want to follow up with me by email, I'm happy to pass that along, but I don't have the answer to that, the first part of that question.
And how about the second part then about resources for schools and educators?
Yes, I put it in the actual presentation, but I'm going to put it in the chat as well. We have a human trafficking safety protocol toolkit for schools that is great, and it's on our website. So I will put the link there, and we also have our human trafficking prevention education grant program. But if you have any questions about that, please reach out, but I'll put that toolkit link in the chat.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. I'll switch back to Nixa now. And a question that you said that you wanted to answer. So if a person is undocumented and they report labor exploitation to Wage and Hour, what happens if their case is not supported? Or you're in mute, Nixa.
We had to have at least one instance of that. Thank you for asking. Throughout the presentation, we talked about why it was so important for us to make sure that we were serving vulnerable, communities and workers, which include workers who may fear immigration-based retaliation and other, threat of process. And so one of the things that I would like to mention is, number one, that complaints are entirely confidential. So if you were to call the Wage and Hour Division and you wanted to offer information and provide information as to any violations of the laws that we enforce, we do not disclose to an employer and or to other law enforcement agencies the information that we have received or even why we have initiated a Wage and Hour investigation. And so that answers part number one. So like I mentioned, the laws that we enforce protect workers regardless of their immigration status. The second part of the question, which is, are they at a potential risk for deportation? I would like to mention, and I did already, that we are a certifying agency for UNT visas. In addition to that, we have published information on our website about coming to the Department of Labor to seek a statement of interest for prosecutorial discretion. And that is in instances where you in fact have a labor dispute and you would like to have Wage and Hour look at that labor dispute and make you whole as an employee. And we have an enforcement interest. We will issue a statement of interest to the Department of Homeland Security, advising them that we are interested in workers that are performing work at a particular establishment or have performed work at a particular establishment. And with that statement of interest, you may then go to Department of Homeland Security and seek deferred action. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of information on our website, which I will include a link to on the chat. But we just really want to encourage workers to come forward and file their complaints, provide information without fear of retaliation, especially immigration-based retaliation.
Great, thank you, Nixa. I think that we have time for maybe one more question. I'm going to answer the one that's very last in the chat right now. If a state or local child welfare system already has jurisdiction over the child, does this limit OTIP support? Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, but the answer is no, it would not limit.
Correct. Yeah. The only thing that's different is sometimes it might shift the process or where the Medicaid and other benefits are coming from. But one thing to note is the eligibility letter. If it's a foreign national minor, the eligibility letter is reimbursable for Title IV funds. Again, if you are working with a child in this situation, you have any questions, definitely reach out to us.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. And maybe last for you, I know that you said you wanted to answer this one live, but giving an example of sexual servitude as part of forced labor, as you discussed earlier in your presentation.
Yeah, definitely. I think sometimes when we think about sex trafficking, we think about, in case of a child being offered or given something of value to have sex, and an adult having that forced or coercion component involved. But in situations for when an individual is forced to engage in sex acts over and over again, or is in a situation of interpersonal or domestic violence, and they're forced to do chores, tasks, maybe they're in a forced marriage type situation, and they're forced against their will to engage in sex acts over and over. They cannot leave this situation. Sometimes those situations actually fall under the definition of a sexual servitude. That falls into the definition of labor trafficking as involuntary servitude, or even sexual slavery under slavery. So in those situations when there isn't a value exchange, if you have information that a child or an adult is in a situation like that, and it may also fall under the definition of labor trafficking. So I hope that helped clarify, Pete.
Great, yeah, it did. Thank you. All right, well, I can't believe it. It's already 6:30 on the East Coast, 3:30 in the West, and I just wanted to thank our presenters again, the organizers, the committee that helped plan this. But this is not the last of our webinars, of course. We will also be hosting one, as is on the slide right now, next Thursday, the 29th, from 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific time. My colleague Emily is going to drop a link in the chat to make sure that you register if you haven't already. And next time we're going to hear from the Arizona State University School of Social Work Office of Sex Trafficking Intervention Research, and they're going to share information on a national study they conducted on labor trafficking. We'll also have 2 panels with the Arizona Labor Trafficking Outreach Project Alto and another federal panel. And right before I end, we're now a minute over, but I just want to say, you know, this is a really hard thing to talk about. And I know that it can induce or, you know, reintroduce, you know, primary, secondary trauma. And so I just hope that you take care of yourselves as you're taking care of others, and just want to thank you all so much for the incredible work that you do. And there will be more to come next week. So I hope to see you all there. Thank you, everybody.